Need to set a timer for your safety. So bear with me, I didn't know if this was going to count me down, so I have to turn this on or I'll talk for the entire day. Thank you so much for having me. It's this really great privilege, as everybody said, to get to come speak, but it's an extra great privilege to get to speak in another country, which is this kind of weird, huge honor that I don't really know how to process except to say that I'm very grateful. So David, thank you for having me. ACT, thank you for having me. All of you wonderful Kiwis, thank you for supporting me. I've had a wonderful trip. This time I was here in March, and I had a wonderful welcome in March as well. Where I come from, we call that Southern hospitality, and I guess you guys have really Southern hospitality. I finally found a joke you guys will laugh at. New Zealand doesn't go anywhere. Because you say Zed, not Z, but it's a pun. I'm just teasing. No, so it's also intimidating to come speak about politics in a foreign country where you know very little about the politics. It's, I don't want to be presumptive or arrogant. I also understand there are a lot of sensitivities that you have to be aware of, that the culture is developed. It's another thing entirely to have to come speak about politics in a foreign country at a political rally in front of the Deputy Prime Minister. So I'm not going to speak about politics, or not too much. I thought, what can an American bring to this kind of a circumstance? And of course, you heard on the video that introduced me that I talk quite a lot about Marxism and its evolution through, yes, our American universities. I love to blame the French and the Germans as much as possible. We can blame some Russians for this as well, as you'll hear in my remarks. But we figured out how to export it to the West in the United States, and so I could talk to you about that because that's universal, but I want to talk to you about universal principles because the ACT Party represents universal principles that I stand for that I think are the solution to this problem. And so I particularly want to talk about three universal principles that your party represents that I think are able to make a gigantic difference for New Zealand, and also to make a mark on the world by taking a stand for them, which this party has taken up that torch and is carrying it. And those three principles are very simply getting government less involved, so allowing for personal or self-government, individual rights and responsibilities. Secondly, the securing of private property rights. Thirdly, equality before the law, which of course has been very controversial for you. The reason that these have been controversial points is because that they're universal points. Universal means they're as true for me in America, which allows me to come speak to you about them, as they are for you here in New Zealand. They're as true for an American as they are for a Maori. They're true for everybody because they are universal principles. So when we think about the idea of finding kind of a unified voice, universal, unified, that's not a coincidence, by the way, a unified voice or a unified vision by which New Zealand can progress, or the United States could progress for me, there's a funny trick. There are two ways to get to unity. One way is you tell everybody this is the party line and everybody's going to do it, and you find ways to force that. Mao Zedong famously did that with a formula he called unity, criticism, unity. You begin with a desire for unity, you criticize everybody viciously who's not participating in that vision for unity, and you, he said, arrive at a new unity on a new basis. That's brainwashing, that's coercion, that's tyranny, that's totalitarianism, in fact, in the Maoist context in the People's Republic of China through the 50s and 60s. The other way is that you appeal to universal principles, things that everybody can see and get on board with for themselves. They can discover through their interactions in life that these things are true, not true for you, but not for me, but true for everyone because they're universal. In other words, we call this common sense. And that's a joke, it sounds like, but that's because we don't know what common sense means. Common sense is a deep principle in philosophy. Common sense means that you have eyes, I have eyes. You have ears, I have ears. And all of our proprioception and all of our senses, we have the common ability to take sense of the world and to use our reason to make sense of the world. Which means each and every person outside of a Mao Zedong can figure out how to interact with the world best, because it's true. So the second way, the better way, the classically liberal way to achieve unity is to appeal to things that everybody can see are true for themselves, regardless of who they are, regardless of their identity, their background, or anything else in life. And to have a party that stands for those values changes the world. So it's great pride for me to be able to speak to a party here in New Zealand. As an American, we've given up on the Commonwealth. But you guys have this party here bringing this fight, David at your helm, and it's absolutely fantastic. So what are these principles? Getting government out of the business of governing to the maximum degree possible. In other words, getting government out of the way. I'm not a radical, wild, crazy American. I don't agree. I forget if my countryman was Grover Norquist or Karl Rove in this case, who said he has an ambition to shrink the government so small you could drown it in a bathtub. But it is a maxim, it is a bit of wisdom that he who governs least governs best. So we don't need to kill off the government. It has legitimate purposes. We've already heard those legitimate purposes. It has the legitimate purpose of securing the rights of its citizens, and it has the legitimate purpose of keeping the peace or helping citizens resolve disputes peaceably without violence. Those are important functions. The monopoly of force helps keep people safe through the criminal process. These are important functions of government, but the principle speaks to very deep incentives. This is why this is universal. The incentive structures between the individual or the private sector and the public sector are completely different. In fact, individuals have a lot of incentives that the government literally cannot have. And so when you align with incentives, you get good outcomes because that's aligning with reality. Charlie Munger, doesn't matter if you like him or even know who he is, he was Warren Buffett's investment partner, so he knew a thing or two about something. He managed to make billions of dollars, and that's US billions, so it's a lot. And one of his principles was, if you show me the incentive, I will show you the outcome. I think about this virtually every day. Show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. So that said, what are the incentives involved with having a problem? Let's say I'm a guy, I am, still, and I have a problem. Here's some incentives. I have an incentive to solve my problem because I don't want my problem. Now, if you're my bureaucrat, I might go tell you about my problem, and you might care, and you might do something about it when you get around to it because it's not your problem. So I have an incentive to solve my problem. I have an incentive to solve my problem well. I have an incentive to solve my problem now. And I have an incentive to solve my problem as inexpensively as possible. So what do you get out of allowing people to solve their own problems and getting the government out of the way? Well, number one, they're not dependent on you, so you foster independence. Number two, they have to figure out how to solve their problem. If they knew how to solve it from the beginning, they wouldn't have a problem. So they have to be ingenious. You get innovation. Number three, they want their problem solved now. So you get economy in solving, you get efficiency in solving problems. Number four, they want to solve their problem as cheaply as possible, so economy comes into the picture. They want to save their hard-earned money that they don't have to fix plumbing with. They're going to spend as little money as they can to get the job done, but they need their plumbing to work, so they're going to spend what money they can, but they're not going to spend extra. Turns out the government doesn't have any of these incentives. You're dealing with bureaucrats who care about the problem because they kind of have to because it's constituents, but they don't have the problem themselves. So there's absolutely no efficiency in how the government's going to address the problem. They're not spending their own money. They're spending taxpayer money. They're spending your money. They're spending everybody else's money. As they say with socialism, right? The problem with socialism is eventually you run out of other people's money. They're spending other people's money. They're a third party. It has nothing to do with is government good or is government bad. It is intrinsically true that government is a third party to every problem every citizen has. And a third party has lower motivation to do it, so they're going to bring less efficiency to the solution, less economy to the solution. So you now have an inefficient, ineconomical solution, so you have a bad solution. Often we've seen a lot of ham-fisted attempts by government to solve problems using all these regulations and codes and piles of paperwork and all of these things. So you don't even always get a good solution, and you probably don't get an innovative solution. Necessity is the mother of invention. So what you basically do is you lose everything that you want to have in a growing, prosperous economy and outsource it to people who, frankly, as much as you might care, and I know you're waving to your constituents, you don't care. It's not your job. It's not your problem. So all of these things that make a society and an economy work and to make it great and make it work for people come from getting government as out of the way as possible, letting them do the minimum things, securing rights, protecting the peace. That's about it. kind of ran out of things that needs to do. And this is extremely important because if you want a prosperous country, you need efficient solutions to problems, you need problem solved, you need economical solutions to problems, and what you need actually are also people who are not dependent, where they have a problem and their first instinct is to try to find somebody to call on the phone to come solve the problem for them. You want independent people, what the Russians called kulaks before they killed all of them. There's a dark point there. You want this, and it turns out, and the ACT Party can use this if it works for them, and if not, I have a cultural insensitivity, but I'm foreign privilege. As it turns out, you have this idea embedded in Kiwi identity. When I came down here in March, the Free Speech Union very gratefully brought me for a tour, and I saw a lot of the country, and I talked to a lot of people, a lot of pubs, a lot of restaurants, a lot of venues all over the country, 5 different cities. And I kept hearing this phrase that I'd never heard before, and I finally asked my host, I asked Nathan from the Free Speech Union, I said, what does this mean? I kept hearing people say, what happened to number 8 wire? So I said, Nathan, what's number 8 wire? And he's like, it's wire. 8-gauge wire. Like you'd make a fence out of? Yeah, like you'd make a fence out of. And I realized that what it is it's a saying that the Kiwis believe that we can fix our problem, and if we don't know what to do, we can just do it with some number 8 wire. Just get a bale of number 8 wire, wrap it up, you're good to go. We can solve our own problem efficiently, economically, with ingenuity, with innovation, using very simple tools, and we don't need anybody to help us do it. And this is deep, deep in your identity, apparently, because I heard it in 4 out of the 5 cities I spoke in while I was here, and I think this is probably an important point. Number 8 wire speaks to this value, and it's how Kiwis already identify themselves. Now in the US, we don't have number 8 wire apparently, because I'd never heard this. Maybe we do have the wire, but we apparently don't use it. But we use duct tape and WD-40. The rule is if it moves and it's not supposed to, then you use duct tape, and if it doesn't move and it is supposed to, use WD-40. You solve all your problems that way. That's the idea, right? So government does have a function, though. It needs to secure our rights, and this is one of the things that I've just heard, so I know it's a big thing in ACT, is the securing of private property rights. It's very important. In fact, I'm going to go further, that every value that brings prosperity to your country that I just mentioned is accelerated by securing private property and is destroyed if you fail to secure private property, on the one hand. And more than that, securing private property, and I mean this in the absolutely true sense, is the basis of all wealth and abundance. Here's why. What is private property besides the thing that communists hate? Private property is based on this one principle called the fundamental right to exclude. It's very, very simple. So you know about inclusion from DEI, this is exclusion. And that's in fact why inclusion is the value opposed to the fundamental right to exclude or private property. Exclusion means if this is mine, you can't have it unless I agree to the terms by which you take it. I can exclude you from my property, and likewise you can exclude me from yours. That forces us into a situation. This is all common sense, but we all need to hear it again because we've lost touch with this and we've lost faith that this works as a culture, not in this room. If I can exclude you from my property and you can exclude me from your property, let's say maybe I have a hammer and you have $20. We can decide to exchange that property if we both agree, say that the hammer is worth $20. So we can negotiate terms upon which both of us will be happy to make the exchange, and because we have the inalienable fundamental right to exclude, we don't have to agree to the terms. We don't have to be morally guilted into the terms. I understand you've got your brother or your mom or whoever, and they have special ways to lean on you, but that's still you agreeing to the terms through family binds and other bonds that you have between people, other reasons, even giving to charity. You've agreed to give your property to charity for nothing in return except that you were trying to help. So at this point, all exchanges, all trade becomes, this is a really surprisingly simple but deep point, becomes voluntary because both people leave thinking they have more than when they started. Guess what? It's like magic. Abracadabra. Wealth just got created. Two people entered into an exchange and left both with more value. Wealth got created. It's not like physics that matter can never be created or destroyed or whatever except in a nuclear reactor. It is literally, this is where wealth comes from. But it incentivizes, this is about incentives. Secured private property incentivizes more than this. I'm incentivized, for example, let's say we'll use hammers and dollars. I know how to make hammers, and I'm pretty good at making hammers. I'm incentivized to make hammers that I can sell for a profit through this exchange. In other words, I'm incentivized to do things I'm good at, and you are incentivized to do things you are good at. In math, we would call this an optimization function. You are optimizing the prosperity and the economy by getting people to do things that they are better at, to bring their unique, God-given talents to whatever question, whatever problem they have, and to say, you know what? I have a problem. I'd really like a fish. I suck at fishing. What can I do? I know I can make a hammer and trade it for a fish. This is very simple economic theory. And I'm incentivized to do the thing that I'm good at to surplus. If I'm good at making hammers, I'm incentivized to do something literally insane. Make 500 hammers. Who wants 500 hammers? Nobody wants 500 hammers, except people who have inventory in hammers that want to sell 499 hammers. They might want to keep the one. So I am now encouraged by the system to make a surplus. And I'm encouraged to do it because of the profit motive involved as cheaply, there's your economy again, and as efficiently as possible. My amount of input, both in time, money, and effort, is to be minimum for the amount of profit I can get out of the thing that I'm trading. So you incentivize the generation of wealth and surplus when you do this, when you secure private property rights. All I'm talking about is securing private property rights. This is very basic. I'm not asking a lot. We don't need a complicated scheme. We don't need 200 pages of government documents. Secure people's private property rights, and they'll make stuff they're better at making and engage in trade, and if the government's not in the way, they'll do more of it. It's very, very simple. And when you are making an exchange of value where everybody leaves with more value, you're creating wealth, and when people are generating surpluses intentionally, you're creating prosperity and a higher standard of living and abundance. These are the principles that we want to install to get the first world nation that we're talking about. It doesn't come out of the sky, it grows out of the ground. Literally from first principles. And again, ACT carries these principles, and it's very exciting to get to share these principles in this way. If you fail to secure private property rights, though, it's really bad. Why? I know that you guys have your tall poppy, so nobody's angling for a Ferrari or a Rolex or anything. But on the other hand, you might want a store, or you might want a nice home, a relatively modest, nice middle-class home, I guess. You don't want your poppy too tall. In America, we have really big houses and really cool cars. I'm just kidding, but we do. You might want a restaurant. I ate at some restaurants here in town. They're nice. You have a very good food culture. You're very proud of the quality of your food. You're very proud of your New Zealand food. Everything's NZ, 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 all the way down the menu. NZ cheese. Can't get cheese from somewhere else. Don't need it. We have NZ cheese. I'm very proud of it. It's very good. And it is very good in the other sense, that it's quality and tastes good. Well, you're not going to open a nice restaurant if you have to worry about getting your windows broken every other day. You're not going to open a nice restaurant if you have to worry about about getting robbed all the time or having vandalism done. You're going to invest in worse things. You're not going to take those bigger risks that cause the bigger growths in abundance and prosperity and wealth. You just won't do it. So if you fail to secure private property rights, you get degeneration. You get people holding back. You get people limiting themselves rather than growing into their full expression of what they're able to bring to the society. And then what you get is broken faith. You don't believe in your society anymore. Why try if it's just going to get taken from me or just going to get broken or just going to get destroyed? Why bother? And you end up with a race to the bottom instead of a race to the top. Tall poppy acknowledged. Not all the way to the top, near the top. Just a little under the top. I'm teasing you because I like you. Okay, so you want to secure that right. You're doing this right. And what do you get out of it? Again, independence, innovation, economy, and efficiency at high levels, generating wealth and surpluses, abundance, and prosperity. Sounds like a pretty good exchange. Notice, by the way, we'll pause for a second, that at no point in the speech have I had to mention what race anybody is in order to have this make sense. These are universal principles. I didn't have to mention if this is men or women. I didn't have to talk about if there are differences between men and women. I didn't have to mention if men can become women or not. It doesn't matter. These are principles that apply to everybody, everywhere, all the time, because they're basic, fundamental economic principles. The things are called things like the law of comparative advantage, which is a fundamental economic principle. The law of supply and demand. These are very fundamental things. The fundamental right to exclude. Very fundamental. Now, the question, though, is the question of fairness. In the Hebrew Bible, since we're trying to be culturally sensitive at all times, we'll reference another culture's holy book. The Hebrew Bible, upon which actually most of Western civilization is based, they have this concept that's brought up many, many, many times, which is the concept of iniquities. God is going to settle the iniquities of the world, which suggests the opposite, which is equity. So what is equity? Equity is your just deserts. Equity is getting what you actually deserved. In other words, if you want an economy that's going to work for people, you want a society that people are going to engage in, you have to have them believe that there's an intrinsic enough sense of fairness that there is some correlation that's ideally fairly strong between what they put into the system and what they get out of the system. That if they put effort in, that there's effort out. We call this the American dream in America, that if I work hard, I can succeed. I can work hard and build a life. That's equity in its real meaning. Now, we've heard this word equity for several years now, and you're like, but James, that's not equity. That's not what's happening. Equity means something else. So I want to tell you the story of how that got hijacked, because in contrast to the individual rights being secured by equality under the law, governments decided they needed to muck around and create fairness, rather than allowing fairness to arise as the just deserts for people's effort that they put into a system, that they have a reasonable expectation to get out of it, something in proportion to you're not getting. This is a very important point to the people that don't get fairness. You do not get out of the system according to how much you put into it. You get out of the system according to how much value and utility you provide to other people. You have to provide something useful. Karl Marx wrote reams and reams and reams and reams and reams of theory that nobody wanted to read. His mother wrote him a letter. Karl, you write letters about, you write things about capital all the time. It would be nice if you earned some. It's a true story. I'm not making that one up. Karl Marx said that. Karl Marx's mom said that, I should say. You have to provide something that other people benefit from if you're going to get them to engage in voluntary exchange with you. So you're incentivized also, by the way, by that whole thing I've already talked about, to do something useful as opposed to just do something, right? And tyrannical systems don't encourage any of that. Government being too involved doesn't encourage any of that. Well, what I've just described, though, is this kind of vehicle toward innovation, but in particular also to efficiency and economy, which have been for a very long time considered two pillars of public administration. The public sector has to pretend it has these incentives because it doesn't, so it writes policies for itself that it kind of pays attention to and kind of lives up to and kind of meets to simulate this. So will they write a policy saying this is how we're going to be economical in solving other people's problems when we get around to it, and this is how we'll be efficient in getting around to it. We will address your clogged toilet within 2 weeks. You know, thank you for your call to the NZ government website or whatever. You know, it's good luck in the meantime, guys. And don't get the number 8 wire out, whatever you do. We've got this. I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Most dangerous words in the universe. So back in 1968 at this thing called the Minnowbrook Conference, which happened in the United States, unfortunately, to my shame, a man named George Frederickson was articulating this idea that public administration had these two pillars of efficiency and economy worked into it. He didn't mention because they have no incentive to do it without making public administration policy, but that's why. They have to simulate what the natural incentives provide for people when government's more out of the way. And so he says, but this isn't enough. Efficiency and economy are only two legs of a stool, and you need three legs to hold a stool up, so we need a third leg, which is equity. And here's how he defines it. Does he define it as just desserts? No. That's the Hebrew Bible way. That's out. We're going to do something different now. He defines it instead this way. He says, where equality means, this is an exact quote, where equality means citizens A and B are equal, equity means adjusting shares so that citizens A and B are made equal. So you have a public administration system that adjusts shares to make citizens equal. That is the definition for another word, not equity. Equity is just desserts. That is socialism. That is the definition of socialism. And the problem with socialism is eventually you run out of other people's money, plus all the incentives are completely fake and wrong. They won't work. So now we have in public administration this new idea of equity being the adjusting of shares to make citizens equal. And they build out this whole apparatus, this equity program, and it's somehow going to be done through diversity and somewhat whatever inclusion means. And we're all confused, and we say we like diversity. Diversity is our strength. We all say the mantra. We say inclusion is very important. I care. I wish there were more people of different backgrounds. It'd be great. They bring in different ideas. We go along with the whole thing. Equity, yeah, of course. We need to make things more fair. Whatever, I guess. And we all just kind of sleepwalk through this. And do you know the real origin of this? It's not George Frederickson at the Minnowbrook Conference in 1968. These policies actually come from a much darker place. Since I'm in New Zealand, I get to make a Lord of the Rings joke. Obviously, I'm in Middle Earth, so I get to say that I can say this in the language of Mordor, which is called the Soviet Union, which is where it came from. In the 1920s in the Soviet Union, the policy that they employed was something called fakticheskoye равенство. My Russian sucks, so if you speak Russian, do not point it out. But what that approximately was supposed to mean is actual equality. The government was going to create equality across all economic markers, all social markers, and all cultural markers. Sounds like equity, doesn't it? We're going to adjust for all of the inequities that were produced by the Russian czars against the minority ethnicities, the Ukrainians, the Georgians, and so on. We're going to fix all that. And there will be total equality on all levels, because until then, communism won't work. Fakticheskoye равенство. That's the name of equity in its original Mordor language of Barad-dur, or aka Moscow. This was come up with by Lenin. This was Lenin's policy for the Soviet Union. We've imported it through the American universities in a new guise. DEI sounds nice. Nice, pretty words. Actual equality doesn't sound that bad either, though. And to make the actual equality program work, they implemented this thing Stalin came up with called korenizatsia. You are intimately familiar with korenizatsia here in New Zealand, I am afraid to tell you. Korenizatsia, koreni means roots in Russian. Korenizatsia, izatsia is like to do or to ify, like rootification, if you were to follow the language, to put roots in. It's also indigenization, and that's going to touch a little closer to the bone. The idea was, under the korenizatsia program, that the Soviets would go around and tell all of the ethnic minorities, the Georgians, the Ukrainians in particular, that the Russians want to force you all to be Russian and to live on Russian terms and have Russian identity and speak Russian language. The Soviets, on the other hand, believe in self-determination for the ethnic minorities. You get to speak your own languages, have your own languages in your schools. You get to do things on your own terms. But did you know that your terms are not Russian terms, and you've already adopted a lot of Russian? The Soviets are going to help you with that. You're actually much more socialist than they are, and they don't want you to know that. They're imposing something called Great Russian Chauvinism on you, and we're going to help you break free. This was literally the message. Stalin called this Marxism and the national question. He wrote it down in 1913 before the Soviet Union existed. And the idea was that they would help people that were, say, Ukrainians, rise to positions of prominence in local councils and in the Soviet Party Congress, so that they would be able to bring representation to those bodies. But the representation would be that the Soviets were going to make sure that they only picked the right people, and the right people were going to be picked according to another policy in this suite that was called raznobratia. Raznobratia is literally the word in Russian for diversity. Lenin, by this, meant diversity in form to yield unity in content. That's exactly what he said it was supposed to mean. So you have a bunch of people from different backgrounds or who look different, who all think the same way. They all, as the modern language in the video that preceded me showed, have a critical consciousness of how they're supposed to be whoever they are. This is your identity politics as diversity, or raznobratia. So the Soviets would use the raznobratia to determine who were the good socialists among the Ukrainians, elevate them to positions of power of Ukraine, over Ukraine, and then bring some of them to be in the Party Congress in Moscow. And guess what happened when they were in the Party Congress of Moscow? See if this sounds familiar. If the Ukrainian suggested a radical idea that maybe he got put up to suggesting, and then somebody else said that's a bad idea, you're just doing great Russian chauvinism. He got accused of bigotry. You're bigoted against the Ukrainians. It's not that it's a bad idea, you just have bigotry. We've been adopting this program since the 1970s throughout the West, and it went into overdrive in 2020. And this is a Soviet program. So this brings us to kind of more contentious issues, and I'll wrap up quickly after that. You have, for example, I won't get into all of your politics, but I'm going to touch the one that I actually have heard of and know, which is the Mataranga Maori. Two systems. I could have given a 30-minute lecture on this instead, about what this represents. But I'll tell you what it represents in terms of korenitsatia. It is a wedge. It has absolutely nothing to do with anything about sensitivity for any people, anywhere at all. It is a way to use the excuse of ethnic status to drive a wedge into New Zealand society according to communist principles. And you say, James, brother, you're foreign, don't talk about our stuff. This is a sensitive thing. Blah, 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 I don't care, I'm leaving tomorrow. Let me be very plain. Communists are not good people. They do not have good principles. Mataranga Maori can be whatever in the universe it is, and in the hands of a communist, it is nothing but a weapon against the society they want to destroy. And I can tell you this, as far as cultural sensitivity goes, there is not a single Maori or any other person in this country or in this world who is benefited by communism. They will use your group like they used the Ukrainians. They will use your group and they will screw you over when they're done with you. The philosophy itself, from Hegel preceding Marx, contains this sentence: history uses people and then discards them. They will use the Maori and then they will discard them. How do I know? Because the korenitsatia program you're installing in this country is the korenitsatia program that Stalin and Lenin installed in Soviet Union, where they lifted up the Ukrainians, and then in 1929, Stalin decided it was no longer advantageous to lift up this body of ethnic strife that he had created. Everybody will be Russian now, how ironic. And he killed 9 million Ukrainians to drive home the point that they're not self-determining people anymore. And the people he killed the most were the kulaks, who were the self-reliant, independent farmers who could handle their own with a bale of number 8 wire. And it didn't matter what their background was. It didn't matter that they were elevated before. This is communism. And it does not benefit anybody to step into a communist manipulation of any value, whether that's one of our principles, love your neighbor, put on a mask, or whether it's one of their values. It does not matter. It's evil. So what is the opportunity for New Zealand here? New Zealand has a very unique opportunity. I get to again speak with foreign privilege as an American. America has decided we're going to fight back against this woke, that we're going to re-articulate, maybe through an imperfect golden instrument, we're going to re-articulate these principles of self-government and of independence and of economy and efficiency and getting the government out of the way. And among the other nations in this world that speak English, every single one of them but New Zealand has crapped the bed. They said, oh my God, the President of the United States, we're not allowed to call him by his name in Canada anymore, the President of the United States, who shall not be named like Voldemort, is so bad we have to elect Mark Carney. In Australia, they did the same thing. We need a super left government. Look at the UK, look at Ireland. For God's sake, look at South Africa. And New Zealand hasn't lost its mind. I told people this while I got here, and they said, no, it has. No, it hasn't, not like them. And the ACT Party represents an opportunity to miss that bullet. The ACT Party is articulating these principles. It is giving a vision for Kiwis, young and old and in between, to believe in prosperity, believe in the opportunity of their country, to build the country the way that it was made already to be prosperous and to be even more prosperous in the future, to give back the faith that this country can succeed and its people can be prosperous and that there can be abundance, that this can be a strong, solid first world nation. And if you do it while rejecting the woke, you send an earthquake through the world, even as small of a nation as you are, because Trump might be an anomaly. But if a second country stands up and says, we're not doing woke anymore, that's the beginning of a pattern. And the beginning of a pattern is the beginning of a wave, and we can put this behind us, and we can get on with freedom, with liberty, and with success. So the opportunity for New Zealand is to say no to these evil programs, to say yes to prosperity and the principles that bring them, to carry that flame, and to shock the world by taking this road, which isn't the Trump road, by the way, in its own way, rather than following the radical left everywhere it wants to go. Thank you for letting me bring this message.